What's up, folks? This is Dan from Discern, and these are my thoughts on the new EP from Foreverlin, You Remain. Foreverlin is an alternative rock band from Wyoming. The group consists of 3 permanent members taking care of the lead vocals, guitar, and drums, with the bass being performed on the road by different friends of theirs. They're basically a 4-piece band with only 3 members, which is not that uncommon these days. They released their debut EP in 2012, a time actually before their current lead vocalist had even joined the band. So in terms of their current lineup, their first release didn't come until 2013 with the album Long Lost. Since then, they've released one more full-length album and just recently released their first worship album, this short little 5-track EP called You Remain, consisting of 4 covers of fairly well-known worship songs and one original, the title track, You Remain. In the past, Foreverlin's sound has been sort of your run-of-the-mill alternative rock style, with their most identifiable features being their liberal use of instrumental sections, sometimes taking up whole tracks, and their ambient rock sound, primarily driven by their guitars, beefy with sustain, overdrive, delay, and reverb, creating a really dense tone. When the band leaned into these 2 characteristics, having these instrumental indie rock jams and centering their sound around this ambient rock style, they seemed to have their greatest success. But when they pulled away from those, the music was left feeling very ordinary and uneventful. And unfortunately, I think this happened too many times on past records, where a number of songs were just exceedingly mediocre. Songs that are hard to describe because there isn't much there to love or hate. It's just passable, barely registering with me, playing it too safe to be affecting. Honestly, at times they have reminded me of those alt-rock bands that play the small tent stages at festivals. They're sort of a dime a dozen, decent musicians, totally capable, but almost entirely ordinary and unremarkable. And I think over the last few years, I figured out what my issue is with this band, why I feel the way I do. And it's that they aren't very good songwriters. They're fine musicians. They understand the language of music, but they just haven't produced very good or compelling songs. So on this EP here, when they undertook an album of covers where someone else is the songwriter, I think they really played to their strengths. Their previous releases had some hits, no doubt, and I enjoyed their willingness to explore their instrumental side, but there generally wasn't a lot of substance or memorable impact on those albums. It's hard for me, even having listened to their whole discography within the last week, to remember very many of the melodies and the lyrics, save for tracks like Long Lost or Broken Lines. So let's talk about this new EP, the band's first worship EP, which has not been their style in the past. I'm pretty sure these guys are well familiar with actually leading worship in a church setting, but their music has never really been constructed toward that end. The EP opens up with Doxology, a well-known, timeless hymn. Immediately, I could tell the vocals were sounding the best the group has ever put out. The balance between the melody and harmonies and the placement in the mix are tastefully done. The sound from the instruments is big and weighty, from the feedbacking guitar that starts the song off, to the rumbling drums, to the ocean of low end created by the bass. It all comes together really well to make this a great album opener, a strong kickstart and a tension getter. In terms of memorable tracks, like I was talking about earlier, this one definitely stuck out. The next track is the one original song they have on this EP, You Remain. Much of this track carries through the prominent bass and thick guitars from the first track. The bass sounds heavily compressed with almost no noticeable attack, much like a synth bass, where it's just filling the low-end space, but not really rhythmically driving the song. The drums are really the only instrument with any punch or bite to it, even though it's still big and booming rather than sharp and snappy. The bass and the guitars just make a noisy mess of things, not in a bad way, sort of clouding up the view, and the drums are sort of like the guiding beam of light cutting through the fog, driving the song forward. I really dug the halftime section that the song transitioned to around the midpoint, really opening up the track, doubling down on their heavy, dense feel, sort of like they were reveling in the weight of the instrumental for a bit. I thought the lyrics on this track were pretty ordinary in terms of worship music. While the track is about the Lord remaining as our King, His faithfulness, the lyrics weren't really remaining in my mind after the track ended, just not very memorable, other than maybe a few lines from the chorus. There wasn't also a unifying metaphor or a creative angle they used to look at God's faithfulness. And the wording within the lyrics, beyond the concepts, were also pretty dull and flat. The riches of God's glory, the immeasurable nature of His grace, it's all dribbled out in phrases like, "We were lost, and you found us," or "We are so loved by you." True statements, but artistically colorless and lifeless. And in the end, the lyrics don't really drive home an impact or stick with you, certainly not as much as the instrumental sticks with you. In the next track, Good, Good Father, they display some good dynamic variance, keeping this song small and simple as compared to the first two tracks. There's really no bass or drums in this song. The acoustic has a pretty full tone, filling in the low bass notes and providing just enough space at the top end for the electric guitar, which provides some really nicely placed tension and release in its watery, droning ambience. This song is basically the low point of the EP dynamically, and things start to ramp back up from here. The next track, Come As You Are, starts with a strangely muffled and bloated vocal intro counting the song off. It sounds kind of like when you speak too close into a mic at a live venue or something, sort of an unsavory sound. I'm not sure what they were going for here, but the rest of the song is clear and crisp. The delightfully pingy ride cymbal and bright guitars, both electric and acoustic, help keep this song light and easy going, much more so than the big and dense feel of the first couple tracks. And the last track, Here's My Heart, closes the EP out with probably the largest dynamic range on the album. The song opens with just a barren electric guitar and peaks toward the end with a sound as full as anything we heard on the opening track. Now, when all the pieces come together in sort of that full-bodied sound at the end, the boomy sound I've been mentioning works well, just like it has on the previous tracks. But in the quieter, simpler moments, like at the beginning and the end, it detrimentally muddies the sound. The guitar and the vocals in these small moments feels heavy-handed in sort of the low-mid frequency range. Like I said, this feels more natural as the song fills in, especially toward the end. But in the subtler moments, it just feels out of place. My overall impressions, I think they sounded the most musically on point that they have at any point in their career. At the very least, they were no worse than they've ever sounded. And there's still some room for improvement, but the vocals sounded great. The guitars and bass were thick as ever. I mean, sometimes maybe too thick. And the drums sounded larger than life. The dynamic arc of this EP as well was really well laid out. I should say maybe valley, actually, sort of high to low to high. But it's a directed journey rather than just an unstructured collection of songs. The track listing in terms of the 4 covers is not my favorite selection of songs. It's a pretty typical swath of modern worship music, and in most modern worship music is not my cup of tea, as you probably know if you've watched some of my reviews before. Just typically too much emotionalism, too little boasting in the work of Jesus. I mean, from a lyrical perspective, as a prime example of the worship music that I don't like, take the last track, Here's My Heart. It's mostly shallow and bland in its descriptions, and it's so focused on what I can give back to God that it eclipses the message of the gospel. As a Christian, my relationship with God is secured and foundationally formed in the person of Christ. It's not a pledge that I make to God based on how good He has been to me, which He has. I just think songs like this miss the point. Instead of pointing you to Jesus and filling you with a glimpse of his glory, they leave you saturated in your feelings and filled up on an emotional high of quote-unquote meaningful worship. I'm on a tangent anyway, because I don't knock these guys for choosing this song or any of the others, even though I probably wouldn't have. It's their EP. They can and did choose whatever they wanted, but that's just my 2 cents about the song selection. There are links down below this video for you to hear this album for yourself. There's also a link to Foreverlin's Twitter if that's something you're interested in as well. Alrighty, folks, that's all I got. Thank you for watching this album review. If you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed this type of content, I encourage you to subscribe to the channel. New album reviews just like this release every Monday. Subscribing is the best way to make sure you don't miss any new reviews. If you have a question or a comment for me about this album, about my thoughts about this album, or about something else, you can comment below this video. You could tweet at me at discernreviews, or you can send me an email, discernreviews@gmail.com. Have you listened to this worship EP from Foreverlin? What are your thoughts on it? Have you listened to their previous releases? Do you think this EP is better or worse than their previous releases, where it stacks up? I hope to hear from some of you. Let me know what you think. Thanks again for being here, spending your time with me. I hope this helps. See you next week.